Well, hey folks, I'm Josh. Welcome back to the shop. On today's episode of SAK Whittling, we're going to make a new little tool to add to our kit. And it's not anything super fancy, it is just this. It's a little wooden wedge. Now the wedge serves a couple of purposes. One, it tightens everything up in the tin. If you make the right size, you can wedge it in here and the tin doesn't rattle anymore. If you don't have the wedge in there, things rattle. So it's actually kind of a nice little feature, but it is not the intended feature, at least not the initial intended feature. So the other reason you need or want a wedge is because the next couple projects, or maybe some projects to come, are going to involve needing the ability to split wood into smaller pieces. And if you're going to try to split wood with just a Swiss Army knife, then you need to get creative. So we're going to talk a little bit about splitting wood with the Swiss Army knife, and then going further and using the wedge to really be able to split some bigger stuff. Real quick note on the wood you're going to want to use to make your wedge. You're going to want something hard and probably still green. This is buckthorn. It's probably not the hardest wood on the planet, but it's what I have laying around. But other good woods to use would be things like ash or oak or hickory. And like I said, this is a little easier to make them when they're green, and then you want to let them dry for a couple of days if you can before you use them, because once they're dry they'll last a little longer. This is, essentially a disposable tool. You will eventually wear the tip down. You'll have to kind of whittle it a bit to bring the tip back, and eventually there won't be much of it left. But that's no big deal because they're super quick and easy to make. So let's take it outside and we will see how it goes. What we need is a piece of wood that is big enough. This guy is, inch and a half or so. And this is going to be what we use to make our wedge. We also need something to baton with, just a stick of decent size. And then you need your Swiss Army knife. Now, if you're going to be batoning, if you don't know what batoning is when you take a knife, put it on top of your wood, and then you use a baton to whack it and make it split the wood or whatever you're going to do it with. Ideally, if you're going to baton a knife, you're going to baton a knife with a full tang. You're not going to do it on a slip joint knife like a Swiss Army knife. You run the risk of breaking the knife when you baton it. So to mitigate that risk, we are going to do something, and this is a little tip, trick, whatever you want to call it, from Felix Imler. If you haven't checked out his channel, he does some awesome stuff with Swiss Army knives. You don't want to baton your knife when it's fully open, because you have a weak point at the pivot. And as you are whacking the blade, you run the risk of putting force on that pivot because you're holding the handle. And if you hit on this side, kind of like if you think of the center here as a fulcrum, you're putting an awful lot of pressure here, and you run the risk of popping the spring and busting the knife out. So as Felix tells us, and I definitely have done this enough to know this is the case, you want to use it with the knife at about a 90-degree angle. Now, a couple things to think about when you're doing this. Do not put your fingers around the knife like this when you're batoning the knife with it at 90-degree angle. Because if your knife slips out of the wood, you run the risk of it closing up on your fingers, which would not feel good. So when you're doing this, only grip the sides of the knife like this so that you don't have to worry about it closing up on your fingers. 90-degree angle for your blade. It'll stay open. You don't got to worry about it closing up unless you do something weird and whack it. It will eventually snap shut on you. But keep your fingers to the side, you'll be just fine. Next, you need a stump or something hard to set your wood on here. And you want to think about where you want to split. So for this one, the pith is here, and I want to use this side for my wedge. This side is smaller, and there's already a little bit of a crack starting here. This wood, I cut this, a few days ago, so it's already starting to dry a little, and that's fine. We're going to use that split to our advantage, hopefully. So you might need a wedge to get started. So you can make a really quick wedge out of just any old stick. So that'll get us going. Now this isn't one you'd want to keep. You got a pith in the middle. You run the risk of it splitting. It's already starting to split. But for just helping us make the wedge that we're going to keep, this will work. Now, if you were out and about and you needed more of these super quick to make that took me, what, 30 seconds or so, maybe a little more. So you could always make another. Or, you know, if you don't carry one around or you lose it, whatever, you can make a wedge pretty quick. But this one, we're going to try to hang on to for a while. So make sure you got a wedge ready before you start using this, because you don't want to get your knife stuck in here when you need something else to try to get the wood to split a little bit. Set your stick on the edge of your log. Decide where you want to split it. I'm going to split hopefully right along this line, going this way right here. So put my knife at 90 degrees, fingers out of the way, grab my whacking stick, or baton if you want to call it that. And it works nicely if you're at the edge of a stump. If you're working on something short, then your knife can dangle over the side. Get lined up, get your knife on top of there, and whack in the middle. There we go. Now, because we made a quick wedge, we can put that in there, and we split it. There we go, right in half. Now we can do a little more. Get this out of the way. Split these off rather than carving them off. You want it to be thinner than your Altoids case. So this is too thick, pretty much in all directions. So we're going to size it down even a little bit more. Trim this outside edge off. Should be noted, you want a piece of wood that doesn't have any branches on it or anything, so you have a nice thin, nice straight piece of wood without anything to make for gnarly grain or anything. Now we have a piece that looks pretty good. We're going to take this edge off right here. And of course we could just be carving this off, but controlled splits are always nice. There we go. It's looking pretty good. So one nice thing about splitting the wood out, you know that your splits are following the grain, and that'll mean that your piece of wood is actually stronger. If you were to carve this out of the wood, you wouldn't necessarily be following the grain, and you might get a weaker wedge. It would probably still work, but the splitting results in a pretty nice, strong wedge. So now we need to put a point on it. Nothing too crazy, just get out your nice sharp edge, and you want a pretty gradual angle. You don't want a real steep angle, because that will make for it just won't go into the wood as easily. So work from one side, go to the other. If you have an axe or a hatchet, you would not need to baton your Swiss Army knife. But the point of these videos is to see how far we can go with just a Swiss Army knife, or tools that we make with the knife. I like to bevel these edges a little bit. Time for a test fit. Let's see how big of a wedge we can fit in here. So that is too thick for my kit, so I need to split it right about there. Got a little curve. Not as good a fit as this one, but it's in there. Now actually I could probably fit both of these. Look at that. 2 wedges. There we go. 2 wedges in the tin. Now, the wedges will come in handy later, and like I said, you wouldn't have to make one of these and keep it in your kit, but they will last for a while, and if you let them dry and harden a bit, they hold up a little better than these if you just make them on the fly. But making them on the fly works too. Anyway, now you know how to split the wood with your with a Swiss Army knife. You know how to baton it, watch your fingers, and you know how to make a wedge, so you can throw your wedges in your kit, and we can have the ability to work with bigger pieces of wood without having to carve all that wood away. Now we have a couple of wedges. Go and make yourself a few, let them dry for a couple of days, and then you'll have some good wedges to use for your next project. Keep your eyes peeled. I'll have a couple coming, I'm sure. Thanks for watching. Have a good one.